You're listening to Expertly Said, a podcast on the art and impact of communication. I'm Kristen Sweeney, founder and CEO of Every Little Word. My guest today is Nichola Gokool, Senior Vice President, Head of Medical Communications at Parexel. Throughout her 13-year tenure with the organization, she has held various medical communications leadership positions and spearheaded numerous patient-centric initiatives, including the Parexel Patient Advisory Council, Parexel Patient Community, and the Patient Advocacy Group Engagement Service. Her expertise in the healthcare and pharmaceutical sectors spans more than 2 decades. Nichola earned a first-class Bachelor of Science with honors in nutrition and dietetics from the University of Surrey, UK, and holds a professional diploma in marketing. She's also a ProSci certified change practitioner. An active contributor to the field, Nichola regularly publishes research and presents at healthcare industry conferences. She was appointed to the ISMPP Board of Trustees in 2022 and currently serves as co-chair of the ISMPP Patient Engagement Task Force. Nichola, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with you today, Kristen.
Very excited to have you here. So we heard a bit about your background in the bio, but I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about your origin story. How did you end up in communications and how did you end up in medical communications?
Yeah, great question. So as you heard from my bio, my degree was actually in nutrition and dietetics. So I started life actually and my career as a healthcare professional. So I trained as a dietitian and I worked in a number of large London teaching hospitals here in the UK, in London. And that's really where I learned the power of communication. So as a dietitian, the only tool I really had in my toolbox was communications. At that point, dietitians couldn't prescribe. So really your conversation and your engagement and interactions with patients was that key tool that you had. And as many of us know, discussions about food and nutrition and diet can be incredibly emotive. So through that start out in my career, I really learnt the importance and the power of communications, both from an active listening perspective, but also the need to have really clear approaches to your communication style, because that was the only way that I could really connect with patients, build trust with those patients that I was working with, and ultimately provide support and guidance. So that set me up on my foundation of my career in communications. I got the bug for healthcare communications. From there, I moved into a number of different roles, working in healthcare research, public relations, and then ultimately moving into a number of industry roles, both in healthcare communications and also then ultimately medical communications. So I've worked in medical affairs and also marketing. I really learned the power of communications to connect with people. And to our various stakeholders. And that's where I find myself now. So I've been with Parexel for 13, almost 14 years in our medical communications division, where we provide end-to-end communication solutions for our pharmaceutical clients, supporting them across the entirety of the drug development life cycle, as they're bringing products and new drugs through from early concept phase through to commercialization and available for prescription for patients and those that need them.
It's so cool. And I immediately when you said, as a dietitian, my only tool is communication, right? Like it made so much sense to me, but is never a frame that I would have placed on that before. I'm curious if you feel like, not as a reflection of your education specifically, but do you feel like you were set up for success in that regard? Or do you feel like communication was either a skill that was a strength of yours innately or something you really, had to learn in order to be able to, influence behavior, right? Which is what you're ultimately trying to do.
Yeah.
Like, did you get that in school and through, or was it more focused on the information and the science?
It's a really good question. So my degree was a scientific degree. So we spent a lot of time focused on biochemistry and biology and chemistry. There was, throughout the 4-year degree, there was a number of components that covered communication. So we had a couple of dedicated modules. I then did, as part of my degree, I did a year placement working out in hospitals. So 2 different teaching hospitals in very different patient demographics. And I think that's when I picked up the need for the importance of communication. So it was sort of taught, but I think it's only through interacting and engaging with patients that I learnt the hard way, probably, thinking and reflecting back on some difficult conversations that I'd had with patients, that actually if I was able to connect with an individual in the right way, that was incredibly powerful. And that meant that the next interaction, the next time we had a follow-up conversation, they were more likely to trust me and they were more likely to open up. And very early on, I learned some tidbits. It's only now as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking about it. I used to write on my, we had to write out medical notes and a summary of the consultation we had with patients, but I used to write personal notes about the patient as well, like they've got a dog or they've got a cat or they're going on holiday to whichever place. And then at the next appointment, I would refer back to those little notes to say, oh, how's the dog doing? Or how was that vacation? Or how, and it helped to just really reconnect with the patient. They trusted me and then they were more likely to open up. So I think it was, to answer your question, a little bit of taught, but some of it was actually on the job learning, self-awareness and understanding that I could be a better dietitian if I improve my communication in tactics and my communication style.
Yeah, absolutely. And, anyone who's been, and we all on the receiving end of someone who remembers something about us from that previous conversation,
Yes.
is just an immediate openness, right?
Yes. Yeah,
that is kind of
absolutely.
created there.
Absolutely.
I love this because I want to stick with it for a second, because I think that it's probably going to segue quite directly into your current career and your current role. But the idea, I think, so often when we think about patients, right, we hear about education, and it's as though if they just had the information, they would then go do the thing. And in reality, right, that probably couldn't be farther from the truth. There's this massive gap of really influencing behavior, kind of compliance, but also, listening, right, as the practitioner who has all the information of what are their unique circumstances, challenges, what's their context that is going to make those behaviors maybe more difficult or a bigger challenge. So I imagine that skill of recognizing the difference between education, which is part of it, and actual influence has been very valuable across your career.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think for me, it's about education is one element. And yes, we need to provide education, but it's also about listening and understanding and then engaging and really taking time to understand what's important to patients, what they need to know, what their biggest challenges are, what their unmet needs are. And then you craft your communication solutions to really meet those needs. And that's something I've done throughout my career, actually, is making sure that there is that connection, involvement with patients. And we can't make assumptions. When I trained initially as a dietitian, there was this view that the healthcare professional and the doctor could be the proxy for the patient. We didn't need to talk to patients to understand what was important to them. We could make that because we were trained professionally. That couldn't be further from the truth. You actually need to take the time to connect with whoever your stakeholder might be. In that case, it's patients. What's important to them? What do they need? And then that guides how you develop your communication solution, how you guide your communications and your interactions with them. So it's more of a partnership and a collaboration than the education, which is just doing something to somebody. It's more of that two-way partnership, really.
Right. And I think, depending on the patient and the complexity of what they're dealing with, sometimes people don't want to know all of the details, the relevant details. It might scare them or cause fear to have sort of too much information.
Yes, absolutely.
Very minor, but I remember years and years ago, I got LASIK on my eyes, and I was in the waiting room, and they offered that I could watch on a video screen like the previous patient, and I was like,
wow.
No, thank you. I knew the basics of the procedure, but I was kind of like, the less I know about this, the better off I'm going to be.
Yeah.
So there's that element too, is that more education, more information, not always better, certainly having it available for people, but
yeah,
not always
absolutely.
the thing we need most.
Yeah.
So you talked about, taking this philosophy into your career, and you've really built and anchored your career at Parexel. A little bit unusual, right? A lot of folks in your space are changing companies every 2 to 3 years. I think you've had maybe 7 different roles there, but tell me what about that organization or the work that you're doing has caused you to really kind of plant your flag there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. And I think for me, there's a couple of elements. So it's about making a difference. So the work that we do at Parexel, so we are what's known as a clinical research organisation. So we're not a pharmaceutical company. We work on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry, conducting clinical research, clinical trials, but also supporting end-to-end on a client's drug development life cycle. So that's providing other elements such as regulatory support, market access support, and then the communications area where I work. So we really see ourselves as being integral to helping our clients and our pharmaceutical customers get drugs to market quicker and ultimately improving and impacting patient lives. So that concept of really making a difference is important to me. Within Parexel as well, one of our core values is patients first. So really holding that patient at the heart of everything we do. We lead with the patient insights. We lead with what's important to patients. So for me, those elements are really what's kept me here all this time, because it aligns with my core values about wanting to make a difference, wanting to partner with patients, wanting to bring that patient perspective in and really support patients and making a difference, as I say. So that's one element. And then the other piece is, as you mentioned, I've had a number of different roles within my tenure at Parexel. So I've not sat sitting in one job and not progressed. I've had huge opportunity to develop. And as an organisation, I've always felt supported to take that next career step. I've been given a huge amount of autonomy where there's been opportunities to develop new service lines. And you mentioned a couple of those in the introductory section about me. So I've been given that opportunity where I've had an idea, seen an opportunity, wanted to progress that through to an actual new service line, and been given that bandwidth and that space and the support to be able to do that. And then the third piece for me as well, and you and I are women in leadership roles in our organisations, having power behind and support behind women in leadership is incredibly important to me, and having that programme to support that culture and develop women through their careers. And that's something that's incredibly important at Parexel. Our CEO is a female. And we have a very, very strong women in leadership programme that's embedded throughout our organisation. So I've really felt supported to have a voice as a female leader and actually been encouraged to develop that. And then in turn, then that's allowed me to support others and other female leaders now to support them through their career journeys as well.
I love that. It sounds like a great place to work. And I had the privilege of speaking to a number of women in leadership roles inside, life sciences more broadly. And a common theme, which you echoed here, is this importance of paying it forward, right? That you've had those opportunities, and then to turn around and say, how can I take kind of the next generation of leaders and give them the same kind of opportunities and confidence to move up and grow in their careers. So
Yes.
that's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
absolutely.
So you mentioned something a moment ago about really working with patients, and I pulled this quote from one of the publications you published, I think, in August of last year. Patients are becoming true partners in research, not just participants. Can you talk about that evolving role and what that looks like, how it's impacting your work, how it's impacting communications work specifically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a journey that we're on with patient involvement in research. And I think the work will never be done. We'll always constantly be seeking to improve that patient involvement. Many, many years ago, I think I mentioned earlier that there was this view that healthcare professionals, doctors, could provide that patient perspective, and we didn't need to talk to patients, because how could they possibly have a role in research, because they didn't have necessarily a scientific background. Over time, there's this genuine movement to understanding actually patients are the experts in their own health condition. They know what it's like to live day to day with a particular medical condition. They know where a drug or a medical treatment helps them, where there are some challenges, and what those unmet needs are. So it's really critical that we engage with patients to take that time to understand and really see them as a partner as we move through that drug development life cycle. So the shift that I've seen, and it's something that we've driven quite heavily through our work at Parexel, and also through the work I've done with the industry society that you mentioned earlier on, ISMPP, is really taking a look, and a hard look actually, at that drug development life cycle and identifying points where patients should be involved and where we should be seeing them as a partner to gather feedback, gather insights, take the time to connect with them. So just to give you some examples, it may be as we're starting to design a clinical trial, reaching out, bringing together a group of patients and patient advocacy group representatives to sit and give feedback on a clinical trial protocol to determine, does this answer a research question that's going to be important for patients? Do the outcomes actually align with those meaningful endpoints that make a difference and matter to patients? And then more importantly, is this trial going to be easy for a patient to participate in, and how can we make it easy? Clinical trials are lengthy, incredibly burdensome to the patients and their families. So actually taking time to understand, well, how can we make this easier? Is there things here that are going to actually, for you, be a challenge for you to participate, and also for you to maintain your participation in that trial? These trials can run for years and years and years. You're asking patients to give up an enormous amount of their time to participate in research. So really thinking about how you can support them in that journey and make it as easy as possible. And then also really understanding why patients want to participate in research in the first place. And many patients that we talk to, it's actually similar to the conversation we just had about paying it forward. And actually many patients want to participate because of supporting other patients that are coming behind them. So once you understand that reason, it helps you to think about the best ways to partner with patients and bring them into that research, so they are this true partner and a key stakeholder in that drug development life cycle, that research life cycle, and then really thinking about what those opportunities might be. So as I said, we're still on this journey. We still have got opportunities, and there will always be more opportunities to involve patients, but we're definitely seeing this shift in earlier engagement, earlier conversations with patients to understand what matters to them, and then these regular touch points with patients, patient advocacy groups, the broader patient community, to really keep them informed about clinical research and to partner with them as we progress through the different stages of a drug development life cycle, different stages of a clinical trial.
Yeah, I love that you said this. We have a scientific expert at a client that we've partnered with, and she's on the clinical side.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we were talking about in conversation is the idea of trade-offs, right? That from a science perspective, science always wants as much information as possible. But from the patient perspective, creating a better experience might mean gathering less data because it's fewer labs, it's fewer check-in visits, it's fewer touch points, and not bringing to light those trade-offs and making decisions. And to imagine it can be challenging with gathering patient feedback, that at the end of the day, those individual experiences are so important, but you still are having to make decisions that are standardized, right, across a group. It
Absolutely.
Can't be a fully customized protocol for each person. That defeats the purpose.
Quite.
So, trying to navigate that and then use judgment to say where's kind of the line, or how flexible can we be?
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously there are fundamentals and principles that we have to adhere to when we're conducting clinical research. And the ultimate goal with research is to make sure that a drug is safe and efficacious to bring it through to market. But yeah, where you can, it's taking those collective perspectives from patients. And you're right, we're not at a stage where we can do individualized, but looking at the broader needs of that patient population, but taking that time to connect and understand what those needs might be.
Yeah. And patients, of course, are not the only stakeholders you
Quite.
have to consider. Give us an overview of the landscape of the different audiences that you need to connect with, and what are some of the challenges of. It's not that those audiences maybe have competing interests. They all have ultimately the same interest, but sort of a different set of incentives and objectives, trying to all get to that same place.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So in the work that we do within our Medicoms team here at Parexel, we obviously work with a broad range of stakeholders, primarily patients, as we've talked about, but also healthcare professionals. And they can be a variety of different levels. It might be your expert professionals who are very, very specialist in a particular area. It might be a general practitioner. It could be be a nurse, for example. We're also working with key opinion leaders and looking at how we communicate and engage with those key opinion leaders, gathering their insights and bringing them into the work that we do. We then also do work with payers and regulators. And then a lot of our work actually is with internal stakeholders. So some of the internal colleagues that work within one of the pharmaceutical organisations that we're working with, and how you can bring alignment within those different internal stakeholder groups as well. So there's quite a lot of different individuals that we work with. And then from the clinical trial perspective, there's other individuals such as the investigators who are conducting the trial, the study coordinators who are responsible for the day-to-day conduct of the trial. So there's a whole host of stakeholders and audiences that we're talking to, each with differing needs, but ultimately, to your point, with trying to get them to the same goal. We're obviously trying to communicate key information. It might be disseminating data from the readout from a clinical trial, if we're looking at the key opinion leader piece or the healthcare professional piece. If we're looking in the investigator side of things and the study coordinators, that's the other end. We might be looking to actually educate them on a clinical trial, what the objectives are of the clinical trial, educating them on the study protocol and what those parameters are going to be as they actually work on the clinical trial. I think whenever I think about the stakeholders, and to your point, there might be conflicting needs, it's important to take it back to who are those stakeholders in the first place? What is it that we need to communicate to them? And that's when looking at what your communication framework is going to be. What are those key communication objectives that you need to communicate consistently to all of your stakeholders? So there is a consistent framework. So everybody's hearing the same thing, but the way they receive that information and the way that we provide that information might be different. So it might be for one stakeholder, they need a particular communication solution. A particular group might want something in a digital format, in a visual format, in a bite-sized podcast, for example. Others may want their information in a much more detailed 200 slide deck, for example, or we might need to do a symposium or a webcast. There's different ways. So it's actually looking at who those audiences are, what do they need to receive, and then what's the format they would like to receive that information. But then our role really as medical communication experts is to ensure there's that consistency in messaging, but then also layering on the different needs of those different stakeholders. So whilst I see, and I understand your point about the potential conflict, I actually don't see it as a conflict, because it's actually just really going back to foundational principles of communications, which is who your audience is and how do you best engage and communicate with them.
Yes, absolutely. And you kind of anticipated my follow-up question, which was around how do you create that much differentiation, right? But also making sure that you're not sending totally different signals out. It's just communicating the right amount of information in the way that, you talked about formats, but also kind of the right context, but coming back from a core messaging.
Cool. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we typically work with what we call a scientific communication platform, which is the foundation of our strategic communications, where you've got that very, very clear strategic imperatives, strategic communication objectives, and then we build from there. So it all comes back to a central point, because otherwise it just becomes noise and not quite so consolidated and aligned in the way that you would want to do it. And ultimately, whilst, as I said, each stakeholder might have a different way they want to receive the information, there does need to be a consistency in what it is that we're saying.
Yeah, definitely. So we've been talking a lot about research, and I wanted to, before we kind of move on, I wanted to talk about your own role in research. So very active in research and publication. Can you tell us why that's important to you, and maybe something that you've worked on recently that you want to share?
Yes, so I love research. I think I'm innately inquisitive, so I'd like to dig into why things happen and really get a buzz out of doing that level of research and really taking time to understand a problem and then work through potential solutions. So I've obviously done research when I did my degree, and then have had throughout my career various different research roles. I worked as a research dietitian actually for a large London university before I moved into more of the official communications piece. And then throughout my tenure, mainly at Parexel, actually I've had the opportunity to be involved in research. And I think it always links back to being inquisitive, wanting to understand how our industry is evolving. And for me, that's important for us to be able to then serve the needs of our customers, but also serve the needs of our stakeholders. So the only way you can really understand what's important to them is by doing research and actually tapping into those individual groups, and then using that to then build new solutions and new opportunities. So for me, it's about being inquisitive, I think, is what drives me and why I want to be involved in research. So
I'm curious if your research, because it's stemming a lot from communications, right? How do I want to say this, is it starting with some kind of observed pattern or shift that you're wanting to quantify versus just kind of fucking, like
yeah.
going and doing a very different kind of process to define a hypothesis? Is it, hey, we're seeing this, let's see if we can
Yeah.
data around it?
Yeah, it's typically observations that we might see from industry trends, observations from interacting with our different stakeholders, and then also looking more broadly. So I obviously work in healthcare communications in a very, very focused medical clinical area, but there's also learnings that we can take from other industries. So we do keep an eye on what other industries might be doing and thinking, oh, actually, is that something we need to dig into and understand? And then that might lead to a research initiative that we then pursue through from a medcom lens and through our own area of business and area of focus.
Excellent. I'd love to segue us now to the one big idea.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you riff a little bit on this here. Today's one big idea that you wanted to talk about was the concept of why. And I know this is both personal and professional for you. So tell me about the idea of finding your why and why that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, as I said, a why really is one of the most powerful words I think we have in communications. And this has been entrenched in me, I think, from a very early age, from a personal perspective and then also professionally. So early on in my career, I worked for a very large global FMCG company. I worked in marketing and medical affairs, and my role was still predominantly communications, but we were trained intensely to interrogate and ask why. So every customer interaction, every consumer interaction, we had to dig into that insight and really understand the why. And we used that to inform our overarching strategy and then our messaging. So I think that's where I learned that this concept of why is so important, and it moved me from thinking about the what and the how to actually the why is what really matters. And this is why it's so important when we're thinking about connecting with our different audiences and with different stakeholders, is digging into that why. But for me as well, it's also looking at what that means for me. So what's my why? So why do I show up every day to do the job that I do? And I think when you have a concept and you understand what's your own why, that can be quite transformative in terms of why you do your job. So reflecting on my career, pretty much every job I've had has always connected back to patients, always connected back to wanting to make a difference in one form or another. And really that stems from my childhood, actually. My mother is a type 1 diabetic. She was diagnosed when I was about 6 years of age, and I can acutely recall nurses coming to our home to show my mum how to inject herself with her insulin. And then my brother and I were then educated, and I was educated at that point, on how to support my mum, how to look out for and how to treat hypoglycemic attacks, so when she had a low blood sugar level. And then over the years, I've watched how treatment has evolved massively for diabetes in terms of improvements in insulin, even basic improvements in how she now monitors her glucose and her blood sugar levels that just didn't exist 40 odd years ago. So through that journey, it really made me realise the importance of clear communications, because I was a recipient as a child about clear communications, and those nurses took the fear away. Somebody turning up with a needle and saying, oh, your mum's now got to inject herself 4 times a day, and oh, actually she may experience some symptoms and she might be very unwell and you need to step in and help her. At 6 years old, that's incredibly important, terrifying actually, but somebody explaining that in a clear way, it took the fear out of that scenario. And I was very much like, okay, well, now this is my job. I understand now because they've explained it to me so clearly. I feel part of this. So that taught me why this communication is so important. And I think over the years, this why concept has become so much more crystallized for me, that having compelling communications, compelling engagement solutions really help to accelerate drug development. That's why I do the job I do and really make a difference. So when we're thinking about why, there's lots of questions we should be asking ourselves. So what's your own why? But then also thinking, why does this matter? Why does this matter to patients? Why would a busy clinician, a busy healthcare professional want to interact with this communications that I've created for them? Why now? Why should they engage now? And I think when you put that why hat on, it really transforms the way you communicate and the way you go about developing communication solutions.
I love that. So two things come to mind for me. One, you talked about being so young when you heard that information. And I have young kids myself, 7 and 3. And I recall receiving advice that uh, you actually shouldn't sugarcoat things with young kids. But
Yeah.
the thing you can do is say, this difficult thing is happening. We had some folks in our life like pass away when my oldest was young, and it was like, don't
Mhm.
don't make up a story, just
Yeah.
kind of give it to them straight. You don't need to do a lot of embellishment or anything else, and that actually, that sort of clarity, which I think
Mhm.
you mentioned, can be
Yeah.
something that helps kind of reduce the fear, and
Yes.
even it doesn't make something easy
No.
necessarily, but it makes it feel more sort of emotionally manageable. And I do wonder about that for young kids, where I think sometimes as adults we have a lot of other baggage, and maybe we need a lot
Quite.
more sort of, I don't know, like extra embellishment around something. Um, and then you talked about, oh, I'm gonna try and remember what my second thought was, because I wanted to hit that point. Um, ah, the why. I see why is so connected to what it really means to have empathy
Mhm.
for that person, and
Yeah.
really, it's a no small feat to actually put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Mhm.
Think about that. I have a background as an actor, right? And so that is like what acting fundamentally is like
Yeah.
you embody the circumstances of that character. I mean, people spend their whole lives trying to, right, like that is a craft that people work on. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes we can get a little cynical about it, like the kind of what's in it for me.
Mhm.
Um, And, like, that's a fine shorthand, I suppose, to say, are we creating something that matters? But I like how you articulated it in a way that let it go that one level deeper, like,
Mhm.
getting into the why and really connecting with them, and I think that also does require putting yourself in their kind of set of given circumstances,
Yes. Yeah.
to understand what would be of value to them.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think unless you take that time to, and that's why I'm using why again. That's why when in my previous role where we were asked to interrogate why, we were actually asked to say why 5 times. So you do the why
Years.
and you'd think about it and then you go, but okay, why now? But why? But why? But why? And until you'd got to the fifth why, that was only when there was the thought that you'd got that true reasoning, that true insight
Yeah,
that you could then act upon. So I think it goes deeper than just asking it once. It's actually multiple
sure.
layers to get that connection that you mentioned, to get that
Yeah.
real empathy and understanding.
Do any examples come to mind of where really kind of persisting to dig in maybe helped change what the insight was?
Yeah, yeah. And again, I'll link back to the previous role where we were working on it was some nutritional products actually that are available on through prescription, and pediatric products actually as well. And it was really taking the time to understand why this particular product that we had under development and we weren't ready to bring to market yet, why it was so important. And actually, it was a formula, a nasogastric feed formula that was for children who were going to be fed artificially. And really understanding why and what was important to the parents that were going to be ultimately administering this product, why it was so important for them. And actually what was important was not that it had all these high levels and the right levels of vitamins and minerals and protein and carbohydrate. It was actually the source of those, and we were able to produce it from organic ingredients and as close as we possibly could get it to real food. It's not real food because it's an artificial nutritional product, but as close as possible. Mm-hmm. And really understanding that was why, and that was what's so important to those parents, that we took the time to understand, we know this is scary, that you're not able and your child's not able to eat everyday foods at the moment, and you're having to administer this artificial product, and you want to feel comfortable that you're still giving your child the right food solution, nutritional solution, really digging into what was motivating them and some of their challenges and concerns. And that's where we only got that through intense, but why. And then actually it came to that piece. It's not just about the sort of nutritional composition, but that broader, getting it as closer to real food as we possibly could. And that changed how we developed the product and how we actually ultimately brought it through to market.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you think about getting into the deeper why across stakeholders, is there anything specific in your communication style of doing that you're using to kind of like disarm them or help them unlock that? Is it, I think about sometimes we're not even aware of our deepest motivations, right? Until someone kind of helps us maybe surface them.
Yes.
Has that been your experience, and what makes that process successful?
Yeah, I think it's back to some of the earlier conversation about building that trust. If you're engaging in that conversation that could be highly emotive, actually building that trust up front, demonstrating a high level of emotional intelligence, that you understand what's important, you understand this is a difficult topic to discuss, and then how you frame those questions. It also goes back to active listening. So listening to what the individual is saying and then using that information to frame the next question. So I've heard you say this, tell me more about why that's important or why that might be challenging for you. And I think it's just using that combination of active listening and very, very clear targeted questions with a layer of empathy and emotional intelligence are the sort of the key pieces for me. So
that active listening is so important too. I know we work with a lot of experts and executives on building content programs, and very often some of the gold comes from that offhand comment. And I say, wait. Let's go back. What did you mean by that? Let's unpack this. And that becomes something that it turns out is like a really core focus. And sometimes I think that's because those things are so intrinsic that we have a hard time seeing them as almost separate from ourselves, or kind of breaking them out in that way. But yes, by listening carefully, you can kind of pick up on threads that, again, maybe aren't the crux of what they're saying.
Quite.
It's kind of fun, like expedition, I guess.
Quite, exactly. It's sort of a secret mission, isn't it? That there's and that's, I think that's a lot of communications, because there's what people say and actually what they don't say, and often it's reading to what they don't say that you want to pick up and that you actually need to tease out, because there's often more of an underlying reason that you want to dig into, and that's where the listening comes in, or picking up, to your point, on a throwaway comment and like, actually no, that's the nugget, that's the bit we need to dig into more.
Yes, definitely. This has been great. I want to transition us now to the last word. So this is our lightning round segment. Every guest gets the same 5 questions, and you just go with your gut on these answers.
Okay, yeah, sure.
All right.
Brilliant.
Question 1, what's your favorite word to say out loud?
Engagement. Yeah. So for me, communications is more about than just communicating. It's that concept of engaging and creating that two-way dialogue. So I love using the word engagement. I use it quite a lot in the work that we do. We produce brilliant content, scientifically rigorous content, but actually if we don't think about engaging with our stakeholders, it just sits and has the risk of just sitting unused. So it's that concept of this two-way dialogue from an engagement perspective that's really critical.
Nice. Question 2, what's a word you know from reading, but you're not quite sure how to pronounce it out loud?
So I've obviously practiced saying this word and you've used it a couple of times actually throughout this conversation. So I struggle with the word segue. Now I know how to say it. I know when I read it and I want to be able to say segue, but sometimes my brain skips a little bit too advanced and wants to say segue, and I really struggle with that word. So I have to pause and correct myself sometimes because it's not spelt the way that you would say it. So it's, for me, it's really important. That's why clarity is so critical, because actually thinking about the words you want to say and actually being clear on how to pronounce them is important.
Maybe taking that little extra beat.
Extra time and that pause to get it right and not let your brain step in that step too early.
It's funny, isn't it, how your brain just has those patterns. I lived in NYC for years, and I still have to slow down to say New York, because otherwise it's like New York. Like, it just blur it all together. And you'd think after that many years living there, it would
just flow off the tongue. Yeah.
No.
It's so funny.
What's one phrase or saying you wish could be retired for good?
Oh, this is an easy one for me. Omni-channel strategy or omni-channel approach. I know this is controversial given the industry that I work in, but it's a real buzzword and it's been overused so much that I think it's lost any degree of meaning and any meaningful definition. So essentially it just means right content, right format, right channel to meet your audiences where they are, and in providing them with the content in the format they want to receive it in.
There you go.
And that's what it should be. It's just a communication and engagement strategy. I'm not sure we need a fancy word, but there is that word. I would prefer it was never used.
What's a communication practice or principle that's non-negotiable for you?
Yeah, we've touched on this a little bit already. So that stakeholder first thinking or audience first thinking. So really taking that time to think about who is your audience, what do they need to know, what's the format they want to receive it on, why should they pay attention, why this matters to them, and then you use that to inform the way that you craft your communications.
Nice. What's the last thing you read, heard, or watched that really stuck with you?
Yeah, so I think we would be remiss not to have a conversation without mentioning AI. So an article that I read towards the end of last week actually was about increased patient use of AI in healthcare. And this was a UK report actually. So 1 in 4 people in the UK are now using AI to better understand their symptoms, interrogate and interpret results that they may have got from their doctor, and also to decide when they should seek advice from a doctor. So that's quite scary. And then in addition to that, doctors and clinicians are also using AI to stay abreast of scientific research, scientific guidelines, etc. And the bit that really terrified me, but I think is also true because I know I do it myself. When we're now doing our online searches, I know, and I think many people are doing this now, we're reading the AI summary box at the top of a search without clicking on those individual links. So we're relying on an AI to actually provide us with that summary of research. So I was contemplating this, what that means for me in my career now and the role that I do from a medical perspective. And I think it now really has to change the way that we're thinking about developing communication solutions, because ultimately any content we create now is going to be read twice. So once by a human and once by a large language model. And if we reflect back on the conversation we've just been having about stakeholders and this stakeholder first thinking, does it now mean that a large language model and an AI platform is one of our stakeholders? Now, arguably, yes, it does. And we have to think about making sure the communications we're developing are large language model readable. But the irony is not lost on me that actually now we're creating communications with a platform, an AI tool, a robot, a chatbot in mind, and making sure that we meet their needs and that need from a communication perspective. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of evolves. But it really resonated with me just thinking about how people are changing the way they're interacting with healthcare information now, and where AI is coming into play a more critical role, actually.
It is interesting. And I think, interesting to think about the effort put into, as you talked about, that precise messaging.
Yeah.
And then knowing that can get, maybe the gist is, let's say, best case scenario, the gist is still there. Maybe some of the exact language is there, right? But there's definitely the opportunity for it to be kind of scrambled or summarized so all of that care you took into precise messaging is a little up for grabs. I do like, though, how you talked about it as one more stakeholder. I think that's the best, to me, that approach doesn't inspire panic or
No.
dread or, a lot of the kind of big existential feelings that I think honestly communicators are grappling
Quite.
with right
Yeah.
now. It's okay, this is one more. We've got all these people
Hmm.
and we have this technology,
Yes.
and it is one of many. It is
Quite.
not everything we do suddenly needs to shift, because at the end of the day, it's whether you think of it as a filter or a
Hmm.
third party intermediary, if you
Yes.
will, you're still trying to reach patients
Absolutely.
and reach
Yes.
people.
Yes, exactly.
So I like that framing. I like it. Nichola, thank you so much for joining us today. If our listeners want to learn more about you, is there somewhere that they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just on LinkedIn. So yeah, please search for my name. It's Nichola Gokool, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and always available for a message or a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was great having you.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for the opportunity.
That's it for this episode of Expertly Said. We're produced by Every Little Word, a boutique content and communications agency. If you liked what you heard, you know what to do. Subscribe, share the episode with a colleague, or leave us a review. If you want to connect with me directly, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Kristen Sweeney. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.